The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., February 28, 2011. I hereby appoint the Honorable Robert E. Latta to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain, Reverend Gene Hemrick, the Washington Theological Union, Washington, D.C.
Lord, in turbulent times throughout our country and the world, may we bring to those who seek peace the loving, uplifting heart that rings through the prayer of St. Francis. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
The Chair has examined the Journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the Journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentlewoman from Minnesota, Ms. McCollum.
I pledge the allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain requests for 1-minute speeches.
This is a gentleman from South Carolina.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask permission to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Thank you. Objection?
Mr. Speaker, last week I participated in a congressional delegation to visit troops and fact-find in Kuwait, Iraq, Bahrain, and Afghanistan. Immediately upon arrival, we were given an optimistic assessment of democracy in the region by Ambassador Deborah Jones in Kuwait. America's team in Baghdad, ably led by General Lloyd Austin and Ambassador James Jeffries, confirmed the transition to an Iraqi lead is working with the professionalism of the Iraqi Army and police. A highlight for me was to meet with the 151st Expeditionary Signal Battalion, led by Lieutenant Colonel Richard Holley of the South Carolina Army National Guard, to thank them and their families for their service. In Bahrain, we met top officials who assured us the reformist Crown Prince is leading negotiations to reduce conflict in this dynamic Persian Gulf ally, where we visited USS Champlain's capable sailors. In Afghanistan, we saw firsthand in Kandahar the success of President Obama's surge, where a surge of 30,000 U.S. troops last year motivated a surge of an additional 70,000 Afghans to fight terrorism. The Kabul team of General David Petraeus and Ambassador Carl Eichenberry are successfully denying terrorists a safe haven to attack American families. Godspeed to Danielle Simonetti Maher, a Washington Lee graduate, as she departs from House service for a new career.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I stand today in solidarity with the working men and women of America. There should be no doubt that there's a war going on right now against workers and unions and middle-class Americans who want more jobs. In Wisconsin and Ohio and here in Congress, workers' rights are under attack by union-busting politicians. It's time for Americans to stand up and fight for the rights of workers to organize and negotiate for safe working conditions, living wages, and basic benefits. It's time to stand up and fight against the attacks launched by union-busting Republican governors and their corporate sponsors. The citizens and legislators of Wisconsin and Ohio who are standing up to the union busters have the respect and the appreciation of millions of Americans. Thank you for fighting for dignity and respect and freedom for the rights of American workers today and tomorrow. And in Minnesota and across America, there are freedom-loving citizens who stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Wisconsin and Ohio. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Request to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today I rise to honor the life of Frank Buckles, who was the last surviving veteran of World War I. Frank Buckles passed away this weekend, and he was 100 years old, 110 years old. I'm particularly proud to pay tribute to Mr. Buckles today because of his deep roots and connection to Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is located in my congressional district, Pennsylvania's 8th. Frank Buckles' ancestors first arrived in what was to become the United States in 1702. They settled in Philadelphia, and in 1732, the same year that George Washington was born, Frank's ancestors married into a Quaker family and moved to Bucks County. Mr. Speaker, with the passing of Frank Buckles, we mourn not just the man who served his country honorably, but we also mourn the passing of an era. His death reminds those of us who served and those who continue to serve their country in the armed forces, and we honor their sacrifices in the name of Frank Buckles. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker and members of the House, 9 days ago now, there was a frenzy of budget cutting here on the floor, and we're going to resume that process probably tomorrow. I would urge caution for all of us. The unintended consequences of those budget cuts will come back in many, many ways to harm this nation. It was estimated that the CR that was voted out of this House 9 days ago would reduce employment by over 800,000 in the next 6 months. Not a good result. We have to think long-term here. We need to be wise. Definitely we have to deal with the deficit, and we shall. But we must not do so at the expense of jobs and employment today or at the future opportunities. And specifically, I speak to the issue of research, development, and demonstration. There are enormous cuts in that budget in the area of energy research, other necessary research that this country has to have if we're going to stay ahead in the race for the economy and for the future. I yield back my time.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Ask permission to rise, address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just before we left on break, Francis Collins came and talked to a small group of us at Health Caucus one morning. Francis Collins, of course, Dr. Collins, the director of the National Institute of Health and the lead in the Human Genomic Project at the National Institute of Health when the human genome was finally solved a little less than a decade ago. And advances in genomics have really been startling, and the project continues to provide much excitement. Over 1,800 genes that cause disease have been discovered. Whole genomes for cancer cells have been mapped. That is remarkable. The promise this research holds to help those suffering or likely to suffer from diseases or medical conditions is very real. You cannot overstate the significance of these advances, and I have no doubt that the field of medicine will be revolutionized. The technology has certainly evolved since I was a medical student some 40 years ago. Things that I would have never thought imaginable are now clearly within the reach and grasp of today's practitioner. In fact, the young men and women who are medical students and residents today, what a world they will live in. The science is going to be absolutely fantastic, and indeed their ability to relieve human suffering is going to be unlike anything that has been known by any generation of physicians that has preceded them. I thank the Speaker for the indulgence. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Permission to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, last year we were told that Obamacare would create 400,000 jobs, quote, almost immediately, end quote. We were further told that in the coming years, Obamacare would create 10 times that amount, 4 million jobs. A year later, we see that those promises are truly hollow. In his testimony before the House Budget Committee, CBO Director Elmendorf confirmed that the new health care law will reduce employment by 800,000 jobs by the end of the decade. Obamacare will take away the current insurance plan for millions of Americans, especially those who buy in the individual market or who are in the Medicare Advantage plan. All of these people were promised, quote, "If you like it, you can keep it," end quote. On the campaign trail, the President said he would save every American family $2,500 a year. Now we know that some American families will be paying an additional $2,100 a year. Additional. How can the Congress stand for this? The only sensible option is to fully repeal Obamacare and put forward better solutions that don't destroy jobs and health care, real reform for health insurance. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Address the House 1 minute, or send my remarks?
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, while we were gone for the last week, the United States Department of Justice made a unfortunate decision and announcement. That is, they announced that they would no longer defend an act of Congress that was signed into law by President Clinton. That is the Defense of Marriage Act. The statement that came out of the Justice Department said they could find no constitutional basis for defending that law. I recall we've had the same thing happen in my home state, where the then Attorney General Jerry Brown said he could not defend Proposition 8, which dealt with the definition of marriage. Having served in that office in California, I can tell you I defended laws that I disagreed with. I defended laws that I had voted against. And I felt it was my solemn obligation to uphold the Constitution and the laws duly enacted in my state, just as I believe the Attorney General of the United States has that obligation on the federal level. It is beyond disappointment. I believe it is a dereliction of duty to somehow now find that there is no constitutional basis for defending that law is incredible, and I think regrettable, and I think we ought to look into it.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair lays before the House of Communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir. This is to notify you formally, pursuant to Rule 8 of the Rules of the House of Representatives, that I, in my capacity as custodian of records for the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer, have been served with a subpoena for documents issued by a grand jury in the County of New York. After consultation with the Office of General Counsel, I have determined that compliance with the subpoena is consistent with the privileges and rights of the House. Signed sincerely, Daniel J. Strodel.
Thank you. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Recorded votes on postponed questions will be taken after 6:30 p.m. today. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 394, the Federal Courts and Venue Clarification Act of 2011 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 394, a bill to amend Title 28, United States Code, to clarify the jurisdiction of the federal courts and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials in H.R. 394 currently under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
And, Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Is recognized.
First, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank Ranking Member Conyers, Court Subcommittee Chairman Howard Coble, Court's Ranking Member Cohen, and former Court Subcommittee Chairman Hank Johnson for co-sponsoring the bill. The Federal Courts and Venue Clarification Act brings more clarity to the operation of jurisdictional statutes and facilitates the identification of the appropriate state or federal court where actions should be brought. Judges believe the current rules force them to waste time determining jurisdictional issues at the expense of adjudicating underlying legislation. The contents of this bill are based on recommendations developed and approved by the United States Judicial Conference to address the judiciary's concerns. This legislation contains a number of revisions to federal jurisdictional and venue law. Among the changes, the bill clarifies the definition of citizenship for foreign corporations and domestic corporations doing business abroad, separates the removal provisions governing civil cases and those governing criminal cases into two statutes, and creates a general revenue statute that unifies the approach to venue and diversity in federal question cases while maintaining current venue standards. Mr. Speaker, I urge members to support H.R. 394, and I'll reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 394 is intended to clarify a number of uncertainties and technical flaws in statutory provisions governing federal court jurisdiction and venue that have come to light in the recent years. The legislation addresses inefficient rules which judges have identified. These rules have required judges to spend considerable time deliberating jurisdictional issues instead of analyzing a case's facts and applicable laws. In the 111th, we passed similar legislation in the House on a bipartisan basis. Unfortunately, the Senate was unable to pass it before the end of the 111th Congress. This legislation is based on studies within the judiciary and consultation from academics and legal organizations, including the American Bar Association, Lawyers for Civil Justice, the Federal Bar Association, the American Association for Justice, and the Chamber of Commerce. Additionally, the Judicial Conference of the United States has endorsed this legislation. I want to thank my friend and sponsor of this bill, Chairman Lamar Smith, for his continued efforts to strengthen the operations and efficiencies of the federal judiciary, and I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we have no further speakers on this side. Now I'll yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Georgia.
I have no further witnesses, and I'll yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 394 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in an affirmative, the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the ayes and nays on this bill.
The ayes and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the ayes and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. After sufficient having risen, the ayes and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceeding of this question will be postponed. Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 386, Securing Cockpits Against Laser Pointers Act of 2011, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 386, a bill to amend Title 18 United States Code to provide penalties for aiming laser pointers at airplanes and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. Lundgren, and the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 386, currently under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the danger of shining a laser beam into someone's eyes is not news. What is news is the ever-increasing number of incidents of laser pointers being directed at the pilots of commercial and law enforcement aircraft. In 2005, when a similar measure was passed by this body, the emerging threat was estimated at 400 reported incidents over the previous 15 years. By contrast, in 2009, there were almost 1,600 episodes reported. In 2010, there were over 2,800 incidents reported. As the Airline Pilots Association has stated in their letter of support for this legislation, quote, "The inappropriate use of widely available laser pointers against airborne flight crews represents a genuine and growing safety and security concern. At a minimum, the laser illumination of a cockpit creates a flight crew distraction and in more serious cases can result in eye damage and temporary incapacitation," end quote. Mr. Speaker, the danger from shining a laser at the cockpit of any aircraft is truly a tragedy waiting to happen. The ominous prospect of a catastrophe is particularly high during the takeoff and landing stages. Emergency maneuvers to prevent the misperception of mid-air collisions have also occurred. In one instance, the pilot thought he was about to strike the warning light on a tower. In another case, the laser beam was thought to be the lights of an approaching flight. Law enforcement pilots, unfortunately, are frequently targeted and have to consider the possibility that they are being illuminated by a laser scope attached to a rifle. Law enforcement pilots have, on occasion, been required to discontinue a response to a crime in progress, due to being hit by a laser. At the same time, it is an unfortunate fact that some federal prosecutors have declined to pursue cases, believing that the current destruction of aircraft statute does not fit the facts of their particular laser case. Some states have statutes that have been successfully used to address this problem, but many more do not. H.R. 386 specifically addresses shining a laser pointer into an aircraft cockpit and will make aircraft travel safer for pilots and the public. It is not only the number of laser pointers being aimed at aircraft cockpits that has dramatically increased during the past several years. The power of the current generation of laser pointer devices has also significantly increased. Their cost, on the other hand, has gone down, making them much more available. The problem of lasers being shown into cockpits is so prevalent that in my area, the Sacramento area, the FBI, the FAA, and the Federal Air Marshal Service have joined with state and local law enforcement in establishing a laser strike working group. These working groups have expanded into other areas of the country. H.R. 386 provides an important tool for our efforts to enhance the safety of air travel. This body passed identical language by a voice vote at the close of the 111th Congress. It is my hope that all members will join me in supporting this important legislation, and I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to support H.R. 386. This bill establishes criminal penalties for knowingly aiming a laser pointer at an aircraft or in its flight path. Incidents involving lasers aimed at aircraft have raised concerns over the potential threat to aviation safety and national security. Some are concerned that terrorists might use high-powered lasers to, among other things, incapacitate pilots. There is also concern that laser devices can distract or temporarily incapacitate pilots during critical phases of flight. Lasers pose a safety hazard to flight operations. Even brief exposure to a relatively low-powered laser beam can cause discomfort and temporary visual impairment. The visual distractions of a laser can cause a pilot to become disoriented or to lose situational awareness while flying. Higher-powered laser devices can incapacitate pilots and inflict eye damages and injuries when viewed at closer ranges. In fact, the National Transportation Safety Board documented 2 cases in which pilots sustained eye injuries and were incapacitated during critical phases of flight. In one of these cases, after a laser was pointed at the pilot's plane, he experienced a burning sensation and a tearing in his eyes. A subsequent eye examination revealed multiple flash burns in the pilot's cornea. These types of incidents happen more and more each year. There were over 2,800 reported incidents of this happening last year, more than double the number of reported incidents from the previous year. Because this is a documented and growing problem, and because of the federal interest in maintaining the safety of our airspace, this bill is unfortunately quite necessary, and I commend the gentleman from California, Representative Dan Lundgren, for his work on this bill, and I urge my colleagues to support the legislation, and I'll reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, this is a timely matter. There's a press report just this week that police are trying to find the person who pointed a green laser beam both at an airplane and a news helicopter in the Phoenix area on Friday morning. There have been incidents all around the country. This is not just something that is peculiar to my area. It is something that is increasing in terms of severity and a number of incidents. And so we need to pass this legislation as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, I have no other speakers, and I would yield back the balance of my time as I urge my fellow members to support this bill.
The gentleman yields the balance of his time. The gentleman from Georgia.
I'll yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 386 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 368, the Removal Clarification Act of 2011, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 8, H.R. 386, a bill to amend Title 28 United States Code to clarify and improve certain provisions relating to the removal of litigation against federal officers or agencies to the federal courts and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. Lundgren, and the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, will each control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 368 currently under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the Removal Clarification Act of 2011, sponsored by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, is amends Title 1442 or Section 1442 of Title 28 of the U.S. Code. This is a statute that allows federal officers under limited conditions to remove cases filed against them in state court to U.S. District Court for disposition. The purpose of Section 1442 is to deny state courts the power to hold a federal officer criminally or civilly liable for an act allegedly performed in the execution of their federal duties. This doesn't mean federal officers can break the law. Rather, it just means that these cases are transferred to U.S. District Court for consideration. Congress wrote this statute because it deems the right to remove under these conditions essential to the preeminence of the federal government on those matters entrusted to it under the Constitution. Federal officers or agents, even members of Congress, shouldn't be forced to answer in a state forum for conduct asserted in performance of federal duties. The Supreme Court weighed in on this matter long ago. As the Court explained in the case of Willingham versus Morgan, the federal government can only act through its officers and agents, and they must act within the states. If, when acting, and within the scope of their authority, those officers can be arrested and brought to trial in a state court for an alleged offense against the law of the state, yet warranted by the federal authority they possess, and if the general government is powerless to interfere at once for their protection, the operations of the general government may at any time be arrested at the will of one of its members. U.S. district courts have inconsistently interpreted the statute, however. Most recently, in March 2010, the Court of Appeals for the 5th District upheld a district court ruling in Texas that the federal removal statute does not apply to a federal law involving pre-suit discovery. Because 46 other states have similar laws, the House General Counsel's Office is concerned that more federal courts will adopt this logic. The problem occurs when a plaintiff who contemplates suit against a federal officer petitions for discovery without actually filing suit in state court. Many federal courts now assert that this conduct only anticipates a suit. It is, therefore, not a cause of action as contemplated by the federal removal statute. This problem is compounded because of a separate federal statute, Section 1447 of Title 28. Therein, it requires U.S. district courts to remand any case back to a state court if, quote, at any time before final judgment it appears that the district court lacks subject matter jurisdiction, end quote. Judicial review of remand orders under Section 1447 is limited and has no application to suits involving federal officers and to Section 1442. So this means remanded cases brought against federal officers under these conditions cannot find their way back to federal court, a result that conflicts with the history of the federal removal and remand statutes. While we passed a predecessor bill last July, the other body developed minor amendments to clarify the text. These changes were vetted with within House Judiciary, and we endorsed them. The revisions improve the bill in two ways. First, the new language stipulates that only federal issues are removable to federal court. And second, the text provides that a 30-day removal clock is triggered either by a request for testimony or documents or an order enforcing such a request. In addition, the floor version strikes Section 3 of H.R. 368. This is superfluous language that references a favorable CBO score inserted in the congressional record last year in advance of our consideration of the predecessor bill. Section 3 isn't needed because we have an updated CBO score, also favorable, that applies to this year's bill. In closing, I'd like to thank Congressman Johnson for his hard work on this project, and I would urge my colleagues to support H.R. 368. And, Mr. Speaker, I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia. And, Mr. Speaker, H.R. 368, the Removal Clarification Act of 2011, will enable federal officials to remove cases to federal court in accordance with the spirit and intent of the Federal Officer Removal Statute at 28 U.S.C. Section 1442A. This is a non-controversial bipartisan bill. In the 111th Congress, a nearly identical version passed the House under suspension of the rules and passed the Senate with an amendment by unanimous consent. Under the Federal Officer Removal Statute, federal officers should be able to remove a case from state court to federal court when it involves the federal officer's exercise of his or her official responsibilities. The purpose of the underlying Federal Officer Removal Statute is to prevent state litigants from interfering with the federal government's operations. There is, however, some ambiguity as to whether the Federal Officer Removal Statute applies to pre-suit or state pre-suit discovery procedures. More than 40 states have such procedures which require individuals to be deposed or respond to discovery requests even when a civil action has not yet been filed. This means that federal officials can be forced to litigate in state court, undermining the purpose and intent of the Federal Officer Removal Statute. Courts are split on whether the removal statute applies to pre-suit discovery. Some courts have found that federal officers cannot remove a proceeding to federal court when these pre-suit discovery motions are at issue, while others have found that such proceedings could be removed. This bill will clarify that all federal officers should be able to remove proceedings to federal court any time a legal demand is made for a federal official's testimony or documents if the officer's exercise of his or her official responsibilities is at issue. The legislation would allow a federal officer to appeal a district court's decision to remand the matter back to the state court pursuant to 28 U.S.C. 1447. This bill will not result in the removal of the entire state case, when a federal officer is served with a discovery request, when the only hook is that a federal officer has been served with such a discovery request. Rather, the bill we consider today makes clear that, quote, if there is no other basis for removal, only that the discovery proceeding may be removed to the district court. Finally, the bill makes clear that the timing requirements under 28 U.S.C. Section 1446 will not be changed, restating the 30-day requirement for removing the case when the judicial order is sought, as well as when the judicial order is enforced. In closing, I'd like to thank Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Conyers for working with me on this bill. I urge my colleagues to support this important bipartisan piece of legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, once again, I'd like to thank the gentleman from Georgia for bringing this bill to the committee and to the floor, and I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and with that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time.
And I yield back the balance of my time,
And the gentleman from Georgia yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 368 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from California.
On that, I would ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. The gentleman, for what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 347, the Federal Restricted Buildings and Grounds Improvement Act of 2011, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 347, a bill to correct and simplify the drafting of Section 1752 relating to restricted buildings or grounds of Title 18 United States Code.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. Lundgren, and the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 347 currently under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I would like to yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, the author of this bill, a distinguished former member of our Judiciary Committee and one who has just gotten over the mourning period because of his beloved Pittsburgh Steelers.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from California. Mr. Speaker, the United States Secret Service began providing protective services following the assassination of President McKinley in 1901. The service's protection responsibilities have since expanded to include the First Family, the Vice President, former presidents, heads of states, and others. The service also provides protection at special events of national significance. To address this vital responsibility, the Secret Service must anticipate, recognize, and assess threat situations and initiate strategies to eliminate and reduce threats or security vulnerabilities. A key component to the service's protection mission is securing the buildings and grounds where those protected work or visit. From the White House to a hotel ballroom, the Secret Service must provide a secure environment for the President and other protectees. H.R. 347 ensures that the Secret Service has the ability to secure all necessary areas surrounding restricted buildings and grounds that house our leaders, their families, and foreign heads of state. This bill clarifies Section 1752 of Title 18, which sets penalties for knowingly entering or remaining in a restricted building or grounds without the lawful authority to do so. Currently written, the Code does not distinguish between those who are there lawfully, such as Secret Service agents and other authorized staff, and those who are there without permission. This bill does not create any new authorities for the Secret Service and does not restrict the liberties of American citizens. H.R. 347 simply clarifies and improves existing criminal statutes that are necessary for the Secret Service to resolve security issues and implement prevention strategy before tragedy strikes. This bill will enable the United States Secret Service to continue to deliver the highest level of protective services consistent with their proud tradition. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this important legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support H.R. 347, which will assist the Secret Service in performing their protective duties, and it does include the Pittsburgh Steelers organization within the confines of this legislation. The role of the Secret Service has expanded greatly since it was created in 1865 to fight the counterfeiting of U.S. currency. The Secret Service became part of the Treasury Department in 1883 and took on many additional investigative responsibilities with respect to safeguarding the payment and financial systems of the United States. It wasn't until 1894 that the Secret Service first started protecting our presidents, and that protective role with respect to the President, Vice President, and other dignitaries has grown substantially since that time. The bill before us today will help the Secret Service carry out this protective function. Current federal law prohibits individuals from entering or remaining in crowded areas cordoned off as restricted because of protection being provided by Secret Service. This bill would simply clarify the prohibition under the existing statute This bill would simply clarify that the prohibition under the existing statute only applies to those who have lawful authority to be in those areas. The bill also would add the White House and the Vice President's residence to the definition of restricted areas protected under current law. The men and women of the Secret Service conduct themselves with valor and professionalism while carrying out the protective function of their agency. They provide protection for a variety of people and events, including the President and national special security events. The Secret Service has other important functions which also deserve recognition. For example, the investigative role of the Secret Service has expanded greatly from protecting the currency against counterfeiting to investigating a wide variety of crimes related to this country's financial institutions and credit systems. I commend the gentleman from Florida, Representative Tim Rooney, for his work on this bill. I do sympathize with him in his loss, and I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 347, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask all members to support this reasonable legislation, and having no further speakers, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
I yield the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 347 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative,
Mr. Speaker,
the
on that I would ask for the
California
yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed.
Carrie, ready? Yes.
Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the House will stand in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
The House comes back in at 6:30 Eastern to vote on bills debated this afternoon. Tomorrow, members will consider a Republican plan to continue federal